A document buried inside millions of pages of US federal court files. A single witness statement, and a name nobody expected to find there. Madeleine McCann. In February 2026, when the Department of Justice released the so-called Epstein files, a trove of court records from the prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein and the conviction of Ghislaine Maxwell, one document stood out, not because it proved anything, but because of what it suggested. And once you pull this thread, it doesn't stop there. Stay with me. What's actually in the Epstein files? So let's start with what we actually know, because this story gets distorted fast online. Document EFT A01249618. That's the reference number of the statement. It was submitted to the FBI in 2010 by an unidentified witness. And here's what it says. Back in 2009, 2 years after Madeleine vanished from that ground floor apartment in Praia da Luz, this witness claims they were heading home from a store when they saw something that stopped them cold. A woman they say looked just like Ghislaine Maxwell, holding hands with a little girl around 6 years old. That would match Madeleine's age 2 years after her disappearance. But here's the detail that makes people's skin crawl. The girl was covering her right eye. If you've followed this case at all, you know why that matters. Madeleine McCann had coloboma, a rare condition that left a distinctive dark keyhole mark on the iris of her right eye. It was one of the most publicized identifying features in the entire worldwide search for her. The witness said they didn't think much of it at the time, until they saw a Facebook post about the theory that Maxwell had taken Madeleine. Then it clicked, and they filed the report. Now, and this is important, the Department of Justice made clear that this statement does not constitute evidence of criminal activity. It doesn't confirm the woman was Maxwell. It doesn't confirm the child was Madeleine.
Lastly, people are sharing this surveillance footage purporting to show a woman walking with McCann down a street shortly after her disappearance. In one angle, the woman appears to be wearing a head covering. At other times, she appears to resemble Ghislaine Maxwell. While the video is real, there is no concrete evidence that it shows Maxwell or McCann.
It is one unverified witness account from 13 years after the fact. But it opened a door, and behind that door, a rabbit hole that goes very, very deep. Building the case for the connection. Let's steelman this theory, because it's not just one weird FBI tip. There are multiple threads here, and some of them are genuinely hard to dismiss. Thread 1. The network existed. This is not speculation. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted in December 2021 and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for sex trafficking minors. She and Epstein ran what prosecutors described as a structured criminal enterprise, recruiting vulnerable young girls, grooming them, and trafficking them to Epstein and others. The abuse happened across properties in Manhattan, Palm Beach, New Mexico, Paris, and Little St. James, his private island in the Caribbean. These were not crimes of opportunity. They were organized, protected, and ran for decades. The people involved had access to private jets, private islands, and the kind of influence that makes investigations stall. If you're already running a global trafficking network, does it stretch the imagination that such a network could also be involved in the targeted abduction of a specific child? Thread 2. The Order Theory. There's a theory circulating in true crime communities and referenced in intelligence discussions that Madeleine may have been taken to order, that someone somewhere specifically wanted a blonde, blue-eyed 3-year-old girl. It sounds almost too horrific to say out loud, but the Epstein-Maxwell network wasn't random. It was curated, specific, tailored to the preferences of very powerful, very wealthy men. Thread 3. Clement Freud. This is the thread that doesn't get enough attention. Sir Clement Freud, grandson of Sigmund Freud, a beloved British broadcaster, writer, chef, and Liberal MP, a household name in the UK for decades. He also owned a holiday villa in Praia da Luz, the exact resort where Madeleine McCann disappeared. In 2016, an ITV documentary exposed Freud as a serial pedophile who had sexually abused girls as young as 10 over multiple decades. 2 women came forward.
He'd stroke me and he kissed me in the back of a bus on the mouth.
He kissed you directly on the mouth?
Yes. He put his tongue in my mouth. It was all wet and it was horrible and I didn't like it.
A police unit dedicated to the McCann case was immediately alerted. But here's the part that genuinely haunts this story. In the weeks after Madeleine vanished, Freud sought out Kate and Jerry McCann. He befriended them, hosted them at his home. Kate McCann later wrote warmly about him in her book. Thank God for people like Clement who kept us smiling. Think about that. A convicted pedophile with a home in the same resort where a 3-year-old girl was taken, who then inserted himself into the grieving parents' lives. His family insists he was not in Portugal at the time of the disappearance. But the proximity, the history, and the behavior afterwards are, at minimum, deeply disturbing. Now, where does Maxwell fit into Freud? There is no direct documented connection between Clement Freud and the Epstein-Maxwell network, but both operated within overlapping social worlds: British high society, powerful elites, and protected circles where abuse was for decades hidden in plain sight. Thread 4. The Barcelona E-Fit. 3 days after Madeleine disappeared, 2 British men in Barcelona's Port Olympic Marina witnessed something they couldn't shake. At 2 a.m., a woman approached one of them outside a restaurant and said, "Have you got her? Have you got the child?" apparently believing he was someone she was waiting to meet. Some sources quote the line as, "Are you here to deliver my new daughter?" The exact wording was never officially confirmed, but the McCann team spokesman Clarence Mitchell acknowledged they had good operational reasons for keeping it quiet, and that the witness, a 41-year-old married professional on a stag weekend, was considered fully credible. He'd waited 2 years before coming forward, partly out of embarrassment. In 2009, the private investigators released a composite sketch of the woman, mid-30s, around 5'2", Australian accent, described as a Victoria Beckham lookalike, and noted it was entirely plausible to travel from the Algarve to Barcelona by yacht. That quote alone, "Have you got the child?" implies she was waiting for someone to deliver a child. Pre-planned. Multiple parties. When the Epstein files dropped in 2026, this old E-Fit began circulating again online, with people pointing out a perceived resemblance to a younger Ghislaine Maxwell. No authority has ever made that connection officially, but the question that woman asked in Barcelona has never been answered. The case against the connection. Okay, now let's be honest with each other, because if we are serious about this case, and we should be, we have to apply the same scrutiny in the other direction. Problem 1. The actual prime suspect. His name is Christian Bruckner, a German national, convicted sex offender, and serial predator who was living in the Algarve region of Portugal at the exact time Madeleine McCann disappeared. In 2020, German police formally named him as the prime suspect. In 2022, Portuguese prosecutors declared him an arguido, a formal suspect, citing strong indications of a crime. The evidence is damning. When police searched a property linked to Bruckner in 2016, they reportedly found a hard drive buried under his dog, containing Skype messages in which he allegedly wrote about wanting to capture something small and use it for days. They found writings describing fantasies about drugging a young girl. They found 75 swimsuits for adolescent girls and photographs depicting child abuse. A former associate of Bruckner told ITV News in 2025 that he is 100% sure Bruckner was involved in Madeleine's disappearance. Bruckner has never been charged at the time of making this video. He denies involvement, but the evidence pointing toward him is frankly overwhelming compared to anything connecting Maxwell or Epstein. Problem 2. The FBI tip is unverified. Let's go back to that witness statement. One person, 12 years after the fact, saying they saw someone who looked like Ghislaine Maxwell, with a girl who covered her right eye. Coloboma, Madeleine's eye condition, was one of the most publicized details in the entire case. It was in every newspaper, every poster, every appeal. Millions of people knew about it, and by 2009, there was already significant online speculation about Maxwell and Epstein. A person who was already aware of that theory could easily construct a memory that fits it, consciously or not. Human memory doesn't work like a recording. It's malleable, especially over time. Problem 3. Geographic and operational mismatch. The Epstein-Maxwell network operated primarily through grooming, building relationships with vulnerable teenagers over time, offering money, gifts, and false opportunities. It was not, by any documented evidence, an abduction ring. There is no evidence that Maxwell or Epstein ever physically kidnapped anyone. Snatching a 3-year-old from a holiday resort in rural Portugal doesn't match the modus operandi of a network that operated through manipulation and coercion, not violent abduction. Problem 4. Maxwell was in a completely different world by 2007. By the time Madeleine disappeared in May 2007, Epstein was already under investigation. The Palm Beach Police Department had begun their inquiry as early as 2005. Maxwell and Epstein were not in a position to be expanding their operation. They were already beginning to face legal scrutiny. It would have been extraordinarily reckless for Maxwell to be personally involved in an international child abduction at that moment. Problem 5. The conspiracy requires too many moving parts. For this theory to hold, you'd need to believe that a high-profile child was specifically targeted, abducted by or for a network that left zero forensic trace, transported internationally, and then hidden for nearly 2 decades, all while the most intensively covered missing persons case in modern history was being investigated by multiple police forces across multiple countries. And no one talked, no one broke, no evidence has ever surfaced. So what do we actually think? Here's where I land, and I want to hear where you land in the comments. Madeleine McCann's name appearing in the Epstein files is not nothing. It deserves scrutiny. The culture of silence and protection that allowed Epstein and Maxwell to operate for 30 years is real. The existence of Clement Freud, a documented pedophile with a villa in Praia de Luz, who attached himself to the grieving McCanns, is genuinely disturbing and underreported. But the most likely explanation, based on the available evidence, still points toward Christian Bruckner, a local predator, a man with a documented history of violent sexual crimes in the same region. A man who left behind a digital trail of exactly the kind of fantasies that Madeleine's disappearance would represent. The Maxwell-Epstein connection is a compelling theory, in a world where institutions have failed us repeatedly, where powerful people have escaped justice for decades, where the unthinkable has turned out to be true again and again. But compelling isn't the same as proven, and in a case like this, where a child is missing, where a family has spent almost 2 decades in agony, we owe it to Madeleine to be honest about what we know and what we don't. The Epstein files added a footnote to this case. They didn't rewrite it. But the fact that her name ended up in those files at all, that should make all of us ask harder questions about the world these networks operated in, and who exactly was being protected. If you've followed this case for a long time, or if this is your introduction to the Maxwell connection, drop your thoughts below. Do you think Bruckner acted alone? Do you think there's something bigger here that's been buried? Is it the parents? Like and subscribe if you want more deep dives like this. There's a lot more to unpack.